As world leaders are converging on Germany tonight, getting ready for the big G20 summit there, President Trump is flexing his muscle on the world stage today, receiving a huge reaction from folks in Poland while delivering a powerful speech there. We have every angle of the president's big address in Warsaw covered for you this hour, beginning with Mr. Trump's direct warning to Moscow, less than 24 hours before his first sit-down with Russian President Vladimir Putin.
We urge Russia to cease its destabilizing activities in Ukraine and elsewhere, and its support for hostile regimes, including Syria and Iran, and to instead join the community of responsible nations in our fight against common enemies and in defense of civilization itself.
All right, Dana, so many people giving the president high remarks today for the tone, the tenor of his speech, and obviously the world is watching and listening, and especially in light of what's going to transpire tomorrow with his meeting with Vladimir Putin.
Yeah, so a day that was like filled from the beginning to the end, and that's what you really want to do on a presidential trip. You want to basically fill the airwaves with just dominate all the way through, because it wasn't just the speech today, which, as you say, was well regarded. It was also the fact that he met with the South Korean president and the Japanese prime minister. Notably absent was the president of China, trying to basically, that symbolism there, saying, you don't want to get isolated from us. Like, we are the good guys. We are on the side of Western civilization. We are on the side of peace and prosperity. And China was not there at the table. They'll probably have a chance to meet at the G20 at some point. But he also, I think, in that, what he was talking about in regards to the setup to the Russia meeting, there's so many complex issues to talk about, including Syria and Iran in particular. The most pressing one, especially because we have actual soldiers on the ground. And that deconfliction issue in that area, as ISIS basically loses more territory, gets more complicated as it goes forward. The other thing that the president talked about, which many presidents have done for decades, is trying to explain to Europe, you have to become more energy independent. You cannot be dependent on Russia for your energy, because they will starve you, or they will basically freeze you out in the winter. And so there is a movement by some in Europe, and headed by the Poles, to try to do that. So the president, I think, basically ran the gamut today of all the different things. I agree with Charles Krauthammer that this speech today, when it comes to freedom and liberty and America leading in the world with our Western values, was really different from the inauguration speech. And it was something that, if you have been following Ronald Reagan for years, you listen to that speech today that President Trump gave, and you're like, okay, that's what I could agree with that. I loved it.
Okay, so you thought he covered all the points and, hit the notes.
That was a great speech.
Today.
Beautiful.
Yeah, very well done, I think. All right, Greg, your take.
I think that the speech, first and foremost, was a reminder that on the world stage, we are back. Pardon us for the hibernation, but we are tan, rested, and we are back. And I think that's what he did. And what's interesting about, when you listen to the chants, Trump's vision aligns more with the present-day world than the predecessor. He is concerned with the big-ticket items: terror, security, freedom. Jobs. The U.S. media and liberalism in general is consumed by the small things: decorum and language, and, of course, as we know this week, memes. So many people, and including, I believe, the people that he's speaking to there, don't care about that stuff. And even when he brings it up, they might not even know what he's talking about, because the small outrages are marginalized when compared to the big stuff that he talks about. He is, ironically, more a citizen of the world than President Obama was. Remember, President Obama was the citizen of the world? He was wrong on every worldly thing. But Trump seems to understand what an average guy in Poland thinks and an average guy in the Bronx thinks. That's unusual.
Well, I think it's obviously an advantage if you have an American president that is, well, relatable, that people are saying, okay, there's someone I can identify with. There's commonality there in terms of the themes that he put forward during the election in the United States, of the working, men and women, the working class, the middle class that the left and the Democrats took for granted and left behind.
Yeah, he really connected with the people of Poland in a way that only a billionaire can connect from Manhattan.
Isn't that amazing?
It is amazing.
Okay,
and Greg touched on a great point. President Obama goes over there and, he puts his jaw up and he reads off the teleprompter, and he's a citizen of the world. And, he gets a lot of adulation.
Right.
But Donald Trump is literally a man of the Polish people, and the way he connected the plight of the Polish people in the fight against Nazism and communism and fighting against oppression with America's fight for freedom. I thought it was tremendously inspiring. On the Russia thing, I think he took a pretty tough tone when you look at the speech itself, when he says, get out of Ukraine. He didn't say that, but, back off Ukraine. He said, watch where who you're backing up in Syria and Iran. He also announced that he was selling the Patriot anti-missile defense system to the Polish. The Russians aren't really happy about that. He also announced that not only Poland, but a lot of the other NATO allies are ponying up their price for their own defense. Russia's not going to like that either. And Dana touched on it, too. This gas deal, which they're working on, is a very big deal because Poland and a lot of these other Eastern European countries get a lot of the natural gas from the Russians. And if we can start exporting our natural gas, it's a little bit more expensive, but that really weans them off Russia and takes a lot of the Russian clout away in terms of their politics. And I think that's probably the most substantial accomplishment if he comes away from this afterwards.
What do you think about that, Juan? The energy, independence piece, I think, is quite interesting. And, from a geopolitical perspective, I think quite crucial and integral to a moving forward, especially for countries like Poland, other people that have been essentially held, oil hostages for energy by Russia.
There's no question, and I think that's an essential moment in terms of how the Europeans deal with Russia in the future. They cannot deal with Russia effectively, and they didn't deal with Russia effectively on the Ukraine because of the threat that they had financial interest in addition to the oil interest. So that's a real point. But let me just say, I heard something a little different there today than the rest of you, because what I heard him again do was to, again, point out sort of this nationalistic view, the United States and Western civilization under threat.
That's in the B block, Juan.
Whoa. But the second thing that, again, struck me was he goes after the press. He went after the press big time in this speech. And then he also goes after President Obama.
Right. And we're doing that now.
It just sounds to me like he also, and this was really shocking to me, he goes after U.S. intelligence agencies.
But that wasn't in the speech.
That was a question in a briefing.
This is the message of the day.
That was in a brief.
This is the headline of the day. The speech.
He was answering questions,
Juan. It's also the next layer. So let's
But I'm just saying, this is what he's doing. He's, to me, going to Poland, a country where you have President Duda going after the press. They can't even cover the parliament and all the rest. And he's going after American media. To me, this is out of bounds.
He was asked those questions, and he answered them honestly. He said about Russia, a lot of people could interfere. For many years, it's been done. How false is that? When the stuff on Obama, why didn't he do anything? That was an answer to a fair question. When they asked him about anything, he would actually answer it. Sorry,
yeah,
but I have to answer this.
But he did this in a way that it seemed to me to say, you know what, this is about delegitimizing my election. That's all he seems to care about, not the reality that all the intelligence agencies have said Russia interfered in this election.
So while in Poland, the president also answered questions at a news conference we've been talking about for the past 5 minutes, been trying to get to this, alongside President Duda. He had this to say when asked about possible Russian interference in our election.
Well, I think it was Russia, and I think it could have been other people in other countries. Could have been a lot of people interfered. I said it very simply. I think it could very well have been Russia, but I think it could well have been other countries, and I won't be specific. Barack Obama, when he was president, found out about this in terms of if it were Russia, found out about it in August. Now, the election was in November. That's a lot of time. He did nothing about it. Why did he do nothing about it? I think what happened is he thought Hillary Clinton was going to win the election, and he said, let's not do anything about it. Had he thought the other way, he would have done something about it.
Okay, well, that's a widely believed theory, Jeff.
Okay, so I think there's two primary reasons why President Trump tries to soft pedal the Russian interference. One, because that taints his own victory. And he doesn't want anything to take away from his beautiful victory over Hillary Clinton.
Huge.
And it also feeds this narrative and by the kooks that there was some Russia deal with Trump, and that's bogus. But anyway, he also wants to leave room at the negotiating table with Russia, with Putin, so he has more room to operate with Syria or North Korea or Ukraine. He doesn't want to poison the well with this BS. So he's also saying, you know, President Obama, if it was that big of a deal, if it was that huge of an interference, he didn't do anything because it probably wasn't that big of a deal. And let me just make one more point. Okay. You're saying that the President Trump is throwing the intelligence agencies under the bus.
Yeah.
wasn't it President Obama that wanted to prosecute CIA interrogators? Wasn't it President Obama who threw the intelligence agencies under the bus when they said they missed the incursion into Ukraine by Russia? Wasn't it President Obama who threw the intelligence agencies under the bus when ISIS took over a third of Iraq, and he was surprised by that?
You know what?
He read that in the newspaper.
This is so scurrilous, but I can't deal with all of it. But let me deal with a little.
You know what scurrilous means.
Okay, let me just deal with a little bit of it, the non-scurrilous part, where you're saying Obama did nothing, because that's so factually inaccurate. He threw out 35 Russian diplomats.
After the election.
No, let me just say.
After the election. What's it matter then, Juan?
Just a moment. He not only threw out 35 diplomats, closed 2 diplomatic compounds in New York.
After the election.
And at the time announced that he considered Russia to have interfered in this election. And he said, remember, he went to Putin before the election. There's tape of him talking to Putin at I think it might have been a G20. And he's staring down at him and he says, cut it out, and said there'd be serious consequences if this continued.
I thought when he talked to Medvedev, he was saying, I can be a little more flexible after the election.
No, but
we also had President Obama on tape saying you can't rig an election.
No answer, and now you come back with this. Come on, man.
He's on tape saying you can't rig an election in October. We played the tape a couple weeks ago.
Excuse me. He's talking about the machines and not talking.
No, votes were changed.
I've been critical about President Obama not being sufficiently vocal and saying there's a propaganda aspect to what the Russians are doing on this election.
Dana Brina.
I really don't even know where to begin. I mean, basically, it was like,
else.
all I could think of is like when I was a kid and we make pine cones, you spread it with peanut butter and you roll it around all the seeds.
Wait,
so basically that was all the arguments of the entire last 8 years were just put forward. So I'm not exactly sure where to start. I do think that the president, he has said last week, well, then President Obama didn't do anything about it and he knew about it. So that is basically saying that the Russians, he agrees that the Russians tried to interfere in our election. Regardless, there's an investigation. Mueller is working on it. There's not been any leaks out of that investigation. The integrity of it is set. Set that aside. What we're really looking at is tomorrow, the first face-to-face meeting between President Trump and Vladimir Putin. Looks like it's going to be a very small meeting with only Rex Tillerson and probably Lavrov on the Putin side and interpreters. That means that there's very little room for leaks. Both sides will come out and try to basically spin their side about what happened in that meeting. There will be a little bit of press, but not a lot. So we'll still be living in this world of interpretation of what it actually could have meant.
Could I add something about, a lot of people are giving Donald Trump grief because he mentioned his predecessor, President Obama. He did it by name, which is way better and more respectful than President Obama talking about a temporary absence of U.S. leadership, because he's trying to be so clever and never mentioned the president's name when he was in South Korea talking about it, whether it was climate. Did it a couple times, but he always mentions
it's passive-aggressive, and he's not fooling anybody.
I'm being so sly about it. At least Trump says your name.
In his mind, he's probably trying to be cautious about not being criticized.
But he knows. No, come on, Dana. He knows when he's saying a temporary lack of leadership.
Of course he does. But he's being attacked every day by President Trump,
too. He's phony. He's a phony.
It was respectful.
No, it was a phony.
Again, I go back to the Bush family. I mean, you don't see, President 41 or 43, they never behaved like this ever. I mean, that
you mean speaking ill of a president while you're in a foreign country?
I'll take it.
That was Trump today.
And by the way, no, I'm saying that they were very respectful. They let the next president go in and govern, and despite the fact that they were getting personal attacks and getting blamed for absolutely everything, they took the high road. They were class acts, and they respected the office, and then when their term was done, they knew when to...
Yeah, but it's also the Trump people who say that that was a mistake.
Oh, my God.
That they should have pushed back. I mean, I like the approach, but I mean,
all right,
it doesn't matter what you do, you get criticized.
You know who the worst is out of everything? Mayor Bill de Blasio, without telling anybody in the city, he flew to Germany to protest.
No way.
He claims the cost was footed by Hamburg shows attitude. Dude, what a horrible little man-child this is. To sneak out of the city, he leaves his city, his responsibilities to go protest. He's such a dirtbag. Please, someone challenge de Blasio. If something bad happens here, we don't have a mayor.
Fine, I'm going to do it.
Maybe that's actually a good thing.
Maybe
something will get done.
With this campaign.